especially in the job search process, I think one of the core aspects that really accelerates things, both in the job search and your career, is intention. And what I mean by that is one of one of the most common things I hear from people that are searching for a job is, especially when they're kind of forced into the job search, whether it's they're looking for their first job or they were laid off or something, is that they're open for anything, right? And that is just very unintentional and very undirected. And when you don't have that direction or that intention, it's very hard to know if what you're doing is right and like how to course correct, how to receive feedback, and having that intention and having a clear plan and direction and just saying like I am going in this direction, like you're going to get somewhere a lot faster than saying like I'm open to anything, you know? And so it's kind of like if you're being intentional and trying to go in one direction, right? It's not saying that you have to like put on blinders and not consider anything
Thing.
else that like comes your way, right? But it's kind of like if you're one day looking for a front end role, the next day looking for a back end role, the next day looking for a manager role, the next day looking for a project, manager role, like those are all very, very different and require different resumes, different backgrounds, different interview tactics. And so like the way you can speed things up is that you find those activities that allow you to compound the results, right? And anytime you shift and change direction, you're kind of resetting.
Hello and welcome to Career Spotlight with Vanessa Ajamoy. Today I have another awesome guest who is called Matthew Sevey. So, our guest today, Matthew is a software career coach and a director of engineering. So, Matthew was able to go from a junior engineer all the way up to a director in less than 5 years. So after making the switch into software, okay, Matthew's passion for personal and professional development is what led him to create My Code Career. So that's a software career coaching company, and it specializes in basically helping software engineers land their dream jobs 3 times faster without begging for referrals and sending thousands of applications. So a bit about Matthews that he started his career in mechanical engineering, uh, working for none other than P&G, so Proctor and Gamble. He then switched to software in 2018 and went into blockchain. So currently, as previously said, he is a director of engineering and a career coach. So, Matthew, thank you so much for agreeing to come to Career Spotlight and share your journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. So, as usual, we'll dive straight into it. So, I've kind of provided a brief overview about you. You've had a pretty dynamic career journey, moving from various different roles, such as software engineer to director of engineering, and then as now what you do, which is a career coach. So for people navigating their careers, what kind of advice do you have on exploring different roles and finding the right fit in the tech world?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, I'd say the first part of my career, I hadn't found that. And so it wasn't until I made the switch into software that I began finding that good fit for me. And uh, for me, one of the driving things was discovering what it is that I liked to learn about again. So kind of funny and that's ironic because back in like high school when I was deciding what to go to college for, I knew I wanted to go into engineering, and the guidance counselor had posed the option of got like probably mechanical, electrical, and computer were the ones that I had said seemed the most interesting to me. And they had made some comment about like, well, computer engineering, like things are changing so fast, so like you'll never stop learning and always have to like keep up with current trends. And as a dumb 16-year-old, I was like, oh, well, I just want to like go to college and be done learning. It's like definitely not that one. And so that's kind of like one of the reasons I'd gone into mechanical engineering. And then, fast forward, what, 10 years after that decision, going back into software after the fact to kind of because I loved to learn all the new technologies that were coming out. And so I think that's a big one for me in terms of finding what it is you really like to learn about, because in order to progress in your career, like you have to keep learning, you have to keep growing. And so making sure you found something that you are excited to do that about. So it doesn't feel hard, it doesn't feel like a chore or a challenge, because you're just generally excited to learn more about it. And once you find that, it's really kind of makes everything else a lot easier. And kind of the other piece of that, in terms of like finding your right fit in like a role or a company or an industry, is understanding that the how much of an impact a team, company, or industry can have on your experience in a role. And so uh, another good example of this is when I was working at Procter and Gamble, I had been given the opportunity to basically move into a director role. And I very much didn't want to do that because I didn't want to do what that job entailed in that specific team and company and industry. And then again, fast forward, 7 years later, I am doing a director of engineering job and like loving it, because like the responsibility and like impact that that role has is what I wanted. But like previously, the circumstances that I was going to be doing it in was like not going to be enjoyable. And I knew I wouldn't do as good of a job in that role because like I wasn't going to like it. And so making sure kind of when people are looking for that right fit, making sure they're really trying to understand, is it the kind of core task that I like or don't like, or is it the like is it more the environment that I'm in, and making sure they're kind of evaluating how those things play into each other.
Cool. I like that comment about continuous learning because I've heard of various different stories where certain motivations for others is because of that kind of how you felt, in the sense that they don't want to continue studying, and then they'll move forward and then realize, oh, damn, I have to go back and do some studying again. So it's kind of like sometimes really difficult to run away from like educating yourself.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you've embraced both startup culture and corporate settings. For those looking for kind of excitement but at the same time wanting like job stability as well, how can they balance these desires in their career choices?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's an inherent kind of undertone that startups are more exciting than a corporate job. And I don't necessarily think that's always true, because I think excitement comes from interest. And if you're interested in like what you're doing, like you're going to get excited about it, right? And that could be in a large corporate, large company, or it could be in a startup, right? And I think a lot of the kind of excitement that comes in startups is often because things are moving really fast, they're always changing, you're always working on new things, and so that constant change can be very exciting for people. And for others, that constant change can be like very stressful and not exciting, right? And so like they can get excited about something because they have the foundation of like a more consistent work style. And then in terms of stability, I think stability is also a spectrum that is going to also depend on like where you are in your life, right? And so like stability for a single person looks different than stability for somebody that's married with a baby on the way, right? And so I think understanding, being able to define like what stability is for you, right? And especially in the kind of software world, it's pretty common to see people see a number of people like moving between jobs in like every like 1 or 2 or 3 years, right? And so if you're joining a startup that has 2 years of runway, like that's a perfectly stable job. Because if you were thinking that you might move for next job in 2 years, like cool. Like it doesn't matter if the company's around in 2 years. Like chances are they'll get funding if they're doing a good job. But like I think it's a frame shift for people that are trying to like considering like a startup versus a more established company of like, a more established company might have, they might still have a runway, but that runway is like 10 years or like 15 years or something, right? Versus um a startup is thinking in like 18 months, 36 months, or something like that. And so, understanding like what that means for you in terms of, your career and like if you're looking to stay in one spot for a long time, or if you're planning on moving around a bunch and trying to figure out like stability for you might be like, hey, as long as I know I have a job for the next year, that's fine. And then I can like figure out if I want to like stay or if I want to move on. And like that is stable because like that is like the plan, right? And I think that um, that alignment of having a plan and having something to support that versus circumstances forcing you to think on your feet, with your career, like that's often kind of like where the instability comes into play.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So talking about kind of securing jobs, you as a software career coach, you help engineers land their dream jobs 3 times faster. What are some of the key points in accelerating like career growth?
Yeah, I was trying to think about how could I distill it down to like one of the core things, and I think especially in the job search process, I think one of the core aspect that really accelerates things both in the job search and your career is intention. And what I mean by that is one of one of the most common things I hear from people that are searching for a job is, especially when they're kind of forced into the job search, whether it's they're looking for their first job or they were laid off or something, is that they're open for anything, right?
Mm.
And that is just very unintentional and very undirected. And when you don't have that direction or that intention, it's very hard to know if what you're doing is right and like how to course correct, how to receive feedback, and having that intention and having a clear plan and direction and just saying like I am going in this direction, like you're going to get somewhere a lot faster than saying like I'm open to anything, you know. And I can say that because like I was laid off, and but I had put in the work leading up to that, kind of throughout my career, saying like this is where my career is going, right? Whether that's with one company, 2 companies, 3 companies, like this is like what I am going to be doing. So then when I was laid off, like it wasn't a question for me of like what should my next step be. Like I knew what my next step was going to be, and so then I like from immediately as soon as I knew I was laid off, like I knew what my next step was going to be, and like that was how I was able to go from basically being let go to like finding the next role in 30 days is like because I knew exactly what I wanted. There wasn't a period of like trying to figure it out, like trying to like get all my ducks in a row because I think a lot of people view like a job search separately from career growth, and like they're really not that different in that their career growth is like the overarching thing that you're trying to do, right? If you're trying to like advance your career and like go in a certain direction, you know, career growth is what you're working on, and a job search is basically an external version of trying to get promoted at your company, right? It's a lot of the same strategies. Like you have to be clear about what your ask is. You have to know who like your network is. You have to know how to like apply for that role. You have to know what your qualifications are for that role. You have to know how to showcase your experience for that role, right? It's just that you're doing it externally for something new versus internally for kind of like a known company, right? And so that's why having always being intentional about your career growth then allows you to be able to act a lot faster in the job market and also be able to see results a lot quicker because you have that intention.
Would you still have the same advice for someone who might be saying, well, Matthew, I've tried to be intentional and maybe it's gone for about 1 year now, and I've reached a point where anything goes, because talking about stability, I've reached that point where I feel like I don't have any more pretty much options.
Hmm. Yeah. So, that's a really hard position to be in. And I know, especially because the last, really several years of the market, it's put some people in some tough positions for
Yeah.
that. And so when we talk about strategies and tactics, there's the kind of theoretical, like this is ideal, this is what we try and do, and then there's the practical, like how you apply it to your situation, right? And a great example of that is like if you're, you know, in that position, like it's been a while, right? And you have been intentional, being like, okay, like my next role is going to be a manager position, right? And like that is what I've been working towards. And then, but like you haven't been able to secure that for the last year. And then somebody comes along and says, hey, I don't have this position to you, but I'd love to bring you on the team as a senior engineer. And if you're, in that situation, like you have the opportunity to either say like, no, I'm sticking with a manager, or you can be like, circumstances, like I was trying to go to this, but like I need something for like practical like purposes, like I'm going to accept this job, right? And so the there's always some nuance in terms of like how do you implement strategies or tactics like with that.
Mm.
And the kind of key thing with being kind of like specifically in this example, like being intentional with your job search, like as it gets longer and longer, is that the more times you change your mind and shift focus, the more
Yeah.
times you're restarting, right?
Mm.
And and so it's kind of like if you're being intentional and trying to go in one direction, right? It's not saying that you have to like put on blinders and not consider
Thing.
anything else that like comes your way, right? But it's kind of like if you're one day looking for a front end role, the next day looking for a back end role, the next day looking for a manager role, the next day looking for a project manager role. Like those are all very very different and require different resumes, different backgrounds, different interview tactics. And so like the way you can speed things up is that you find those activities that allow you to compound the results, right? And
Mhm.
anytime you shift and change direction, you're kind of resetting. And so like if you can like never kind of get to that point where you're compounding the results that you're getting to, that's where it's really challenging for people.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. Um, so um back onto the point about kind of wearing different hats. You have like various backgrounds in blockchain and consumer goods. How important would you say it is to explore different industries?
Hmm. Yeah. This kind of goes back to like one of my original points about you know, the difference between doing the difference like that an industry can have on your experience in a role, right?
Mm.
And so while my background might seem very varied, the one of the core things through it is this kind of teaching and management and leadership kind of track that I've been on. And so kind of that was what I was doing at Procter and Gamble. And then I saw that the trajectory of that career was not going to be what I wanted in that industry, like in that company. Moving into software gave me more opportunities to do the same things, but in a different context, different opportunities, different teams. And so that was another reason why I was able to kind of make the shift into software and then go from first job to director in 5 years, because that was a continuation of what I was doing in a previous industry in a previous career, and identify like what are the things that I can just swap out but keep the core tenants going through my career to allow that to again compound my experience and compound that acceleration of the career growth that I was looking for.
Sure. Talking about first jobs, one of like the challenges that some people face is like they always get feedback saying that they lack experience. What's
Mhm.
your go-to advice for them to stand out and be able to showcase their skills effectively in such a competitive market, especially like such a time as this?
Yeah, so I love that question because especially in the software realm, software is such a unique opportunity where like you have the ability to create your own experience, right? And so there's uh, very common and almost standard practice by now for people trying to transition into software is to build some sort of portfolio, right?
Mm,
And there's a lot of things that a portfolio can do for you. And at its core, it's about showing experience. And now, I think one of the things, when you see people that make the transition very easily versus make the transition, where it's harder, a lot of it comes down to like, what do they actually do for their portfolio, right? So the people that try and do kind of quantity over quality or do a lot of clones or like mocks of things like, a recipe app, a to-do list, like, some sort of, you know, stock trader app, like, those things like you see over and over and over and over again, right? And they teach a lot of great skills. Like that's why people do them. But you build that in a week or two and then you don't do anything with it, right? And
mm,
so, and people interviewing you like know that. And so like even though if you have three really nice applications, total, like you spent 2 months building them, like that's not that much experience. Now, to as an alternative way to build a portfolio is like actually, leaning into the fact that like, you're becoming a software developer, like, and you can just build whatever you want and build the experience that you want, like being able to build something that like you actually want to use as a user and then see where that takes you. And so there's like some of the people that have transitioned to software that I've seen do it the fastest, like did just that. Like they started out building something, learning software because they wanted to solve a problem, getting excited about it, and then like they have all of a sudden they have a year and a half working on this one thing, and like that's a lot more interesting and a lot more impressive to an interviewer than three applications that you built over the
mm,
course of 2 months or something.
mm,
And the only difference between you working on something for a year and a half, and like a startup is that the startup is intentionally trying to, I don't know, raise funding, And so if you both have users, like you basically started your own startup, and it's all about then how do you pitch that, right? And this is something that like I did myself, right? I like from the very beginning like was learning getting into software because it was something that was interesting to me. I liked learning it. I didn't initially start learning to code to land a job. I was just like, this seems interesting. I could do this on the side and like work on some fun projects. Like, let's see where this takes me. And that's like what I did. And I built things that I could talk to other businesses about and like, have that conversation, like kind of like, basically create that own full experience for myself. And then at the end of that, be like, okay, maybe this would be like fun to do for like my job. And then because I had like then it was easy, much easier for me to like land that first job because like I had this thing that I could speak to that was a year plus of experience that I've been working on it versus to go, hey, I started learning to code in January, did my boot camp. Now it's May and I have these three projects, like all this experience, right? And I think that's like something that a lot of people really struggle with. And so trying to from the beginning think about like what would I like to try and build and use myself like as a user, and then like that just is going to do so much for you in terms of creating experience, having you ask different questions, having you think about the design differently, how you think about the maintenance of it, and it just has a lot of really great effects on your job search.
sure. So it kind of started off kind of like a side hustle slash passion, and then um, became kind of the main role in the job.
Mhm,
So you've had experience within startups and the whole kind of startup grind. Um,
mhm.
People aspiring to join startups and make an impact, what kind of skills or mindset should they cultivate to thrive in such a dynamic environment?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. There's a lot of good articles and blogs on this, and one of the acronyms that's used that are going to describe a startup environment is Is it VUCA? And so VUCA, so volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so it's like, how do you find people like thrive in that environment? And you know, they're like some of the characteristics that really stand out are, one, determination, right? In terms of like being able to, work on something without the assurance that like you're doing the right thing, right? And so like a lot of times in the startup, like you're just figuring it out. Like no one's done it before. There isn't a template. Like, you're going to basically just like work towards something for potentially like months, and then without ever getting any feedback of like whether or not you're going in the right direction, right? And so like being able to have that kind of determination to kind of figure out solutions to challenges and like keep moving that in that direction, and being like able to kind of step into that very like self-directed role of like being able to take an idea, take a concept, like ask some directed questions, but then being able to like know how to kind of find answers yourself, right? And I think the last bit as well, which I think is not just really good for like startups, but like is very important across your career, is that ability to is that communication ability, right? And so like having strong communication skills in a variety of forms, right? Like verbal and written, and understanding all the different, especially in a remote context, like we communicate very differently now, right? It's kind of a bunch of text threads or Slack threads or emails or GitHub discussions, like or Zoom calls. Like there's all sorts of different ways, and being able to know how to navigate those effectively, and what type of communication style is effective in all of those mediums is really important, and helps go a long way to be able to communicate important ideas, being able to voice concerns or questions, and being able to help your team really move forward.
This kind of links back to this question around stability to a certain degree, but what's your take on taking calculated career risks and embracing the change? And for you personally, how has it kind of shaped your own career decisions?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think the concept of risk again is like a very personal scale, right? And understanding that not making a decision or not doing something is just as risky or potentially more risky than doing something, right? And so I think the idea of like a calculated risk, I think you could just tell people that it's just a calculated decision, and understanding like both ends of both making a decision but also not making a decision. And so there's going back to like my example, like when I decided to leave a quote very stable traditional like career at like Procter and Gamble, like never would have had to worry about runway, like never, it's like I can like knew what my career was going to be. Like
Yeah.
the you could say it's like, oh, it was very risky to like leave that and change careers and like a startup, and it's like, well, on the converse, like I think it was a larger risk to stay, because the risk was I was going to hate what I did for the rest of my life. And like that was going to then have a lot of negative impacts like on like my mental health, like my relationships, like all those things, right? And so there's you know doing those, understanding in the sense of these calculated risks, like, and using the I guess like that example of like making some sort of career change, right? Whether it's like into software, or whether it's just like a different, going from engineering to like product, or going from marketing to product, or something like that. Like understanding all the factors, understanding the considerations, and then and just making sure you understand what those are, and like how you're going to address them, like what's your plan for it, kind of play out the kind of like worst case scenarios. And if like you're okay with that, then awesome, like move forward, right? Because you know taking those risks, taking those changes is often what kind of leads to a lot of like exponential like growth like throughout your career, and exponential kind of like upside like for even just like your personal life as well, right? And so having, I think when you're making those like decisions, right, it's like trying to think about maybe like changing companies or changing jobs or changing roles. It's like I think a lot of the times the first thing people ask, or like the two things that people ask is like, well, like what if I don't get it, or like what if I hate it, right?
Mm.
And it's like, well, like what if I don't get it? It's like, okay, well, if you're doing it while you currently have a job, if you don't get it, nothing changes, right? It's fine. And so like you can either keep trying or you can you know, decide to stop, right? It's like not like so there's not like a huge downside there, right? You either like keep doing what you're doing, right? And so like that's like a risk for that people can kind of evaluate is like, hey, what's um do I do this like while still working my current job, or do I take a leap? You know, that's something to consider. And then like, oh, like, well, what if I hate it? It's like, well, if you make the change successfully and then you don't like it, the good news is that you already made the change successfully. So like, you were already able to make the change. So you can always go back, or you can then find another job, right? Because if you were able to land that job, every day that you were in that job, you were building experience in that thing, which then makes it easier to land that next job, right? And so there's that kind of concern of like, well, what if I hate it? Is undertoned by the fact that like you were successful, right? You successfully did it, and so like let's like celebrate that, and then okay, like if you don't like it, then cool, like you just we do it again, right? And that's fine. And the next one's going to be easier because you already did it once successfully. So I think there's a lot of times kind of talking through the kind of full picture on those things really kind of eliminates a lot of the a risk, or allows you to kind of think about it differently. That it doesn't seem like such a risky thing, and more is just a choice that you're making kind of over the length of your career.
Sure. When you were making that final decision to leave Procter and Gamble, what was kind of like the final drive that made you decide to see it through and exit? And was after you'd made that decision, do you remember if there was any point in time where you kind of questioned yourself whether you'd made the right choice or not?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really the tipping point for me, I think there were two things. Like one, the I when I turned down a promotion at my current job, it's like that was like a very tangible act that kind of confirmed for me that like this is not the career for me. Like clearly I am good at it, right? Being good and wanting to do something are two separate things, right? And so, people wanted me to do it because I was good at my job, but like I knew I just didn't want to do it because I knew I wasn't going to be happy. And it's like that kind of like that tangible kind of like action of like I'm not going to be happy if I do this. Like it's like okay, like I need to do something different. It's like what is that, right? And then the you know, I think that was a little bit before I was really doing a lot of like the software work, and it was probably one of the or I like started doing like software on the side, but I hadn't like really considered it as a career yet. And so then as I was then focusing more and more on software, kind of like working on like side projects, like things like I just liked to do, like I was realizing kind of like looking back, it's like okay, like I'm probably spending like 20 hours a week outside of my job, like doing this like coding thing, like if I like it enough to do it in my free time, then like I'm probably going to like it enough to like do it as my job, you know. And so then that was kind of I think the final straw of like, okay, like I'm clearly unhappy in my current career. Like there is this thing that I could do as a career that I'm spending my free time on. So like now it's like, time to like just like start moving in that direction. And I think there's for I think for me, something that I don't know if I ever necessarily uh, doubted if it was the right choice. There's definitely times that I was like, frustrated and down on myself, like when I totally bombed an interview or something.
Mm.
But I think the like for me, like it was like I had made the decision like this is what I'm doing, and I'm like doesn't matter how long it takes. Like this is what I'm going to do, right? And so I think, for me, again, going back to like the calculated risk piece, like, because I knew it was going to be challenging, right? And like I didn't know how long it was going to take me. And like, for me, I had uh, never interviewed for a like real job before, right? Like I interviewed for an internship in college, got that internship. That internship turned into a second internship. That internship turned into like a full-time offer. And then I had just been at that company, right? So it's like my experience interviewing is like, and like that interview for the internship, like I don't even remember applying for it. I got an email like the night before that my interview was like 9 a.m. the next day. And so like I didn't even prep for it. I didn't even like I knew nothing about P&G. Like I showed up and I was just like, I don't know, like blacked out the interview because I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so like that was my last interview experience. And now here I am like 8 years later, like trying to like switch careers. And it's just like I like I am not confident in my interview skills at that point. It's like how do I like hedge my bets against this, right? So like doing knowing that I was gonna be doing everything part-time, like finding like a part-time boot camp, so like help with that, um, you know, finding one that really prioritized like the career side of things and like interview skills and like things like that, because like that was like I knew that that was going to be my biggest deficit, right? And kind of leaning into that and then be like, this is like I'm going to keep working towards this until it is successful until I get this job because like not getting it is like not an option, right? Like this is like this will happen eventually, and I will keep adjusting my plan until it happens. And I think I think that's potentially something that really